All right, I'd like to call this special Cleveland Heights Committee of the Whole meeting to order. It is May 27th at 7:22. Annie, would you call the roll?
Cobb.
Here.
Kuda.
Here.
Petrus.
Here.
Larson. Here. Maddox. Russell. Here. Posh.
Here. All right, any old business? No old business? Okay. I thought we wanted to get, but somebody asked me if we could get an update on the key card access, or was that not true?
Yes, I mean, if the law department could share an update, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it should be ready to go on the agenda for Monday, correct?
Yes.
So we're all set for that. All right, any other old business? Go ahead.
Well, I think that sort of relates to that. And do we have an issue with what parts of the building the mayor has access to? And well, based on the news report that came out today with the mayor accessing parts of the building that he told us he had no access to, do we need to look at strengthening that legislation or changing it? I think it's something that needs to be addressed.
So you're talking about adding or amending?
Adding or amending. I mean, I think it's ridiculous that council, for example, our access to this building is limited.
Zero.
We don't have an office space in here. We don't have key cards to go into any parts of the building. As far as I can tell, there's no charter provision that gives the mayor exclusive control of the city properties. There's an ordinance that gives him authority over the personal and real city property. We need to look at, I believe, amending that ordinance to give council some say in what's occurring with the city property.
So I just want to understand this, because you kind of said two things, and I understand that this is new for today, but the key card access legislation
That's different.
and the existing property management legislation, if you will, or not legislation, but ordinance, you're not talking about incorporating the limiting of the property access to the key card legislation. You're talking about amending some existing legislation.
A broader change, and I don't know how, if the mayor currently controls key card access, presumably, and I don't know the specific ordinance that gives him control of the city property, but don't we have to look at changing that? And I haven't seen the key card legislation, so maybe I should refrain from commenting until we do see it. But if he's got control of the property, how do we restrict key card access without amending that ordinance?
So this key card ordinance, as we're referring to it right now,
Yes.
right, the way it's set up is that it distinguishes between restricted areas, secured areas, and then everything else. And then essentially the restricted area access is as needed. The secured areas within city property require key card or some sort of key access to enter. That's limited to employees, but there is a lot of discretion as to which employees can enter which secured areas. For instance, all day long, I'm running back and forth between the planning department, and that door requires key card access. We don't want only planning department employees to have key card access to that door necessarily, because that can hinder just day-to-day operations. But then there is also everything else, which we can't really limit access to without carving out exceptions for the general public. And there are exceptions carved out for the general public access to all areas to the extent necessary for them to avail themselves of the benefits and services of the city. with respect to restricted areas, the general public are required to be essentially accompanied and escorted at all times. An example of that could be if somebody is coming in to provide a statement or deposition or something to the law department, that person needs to be escorted through. And can't be left unattended so long as there is sensitive information around. And all of this is defined in set definitions at the top of the ordinance. So that allows for a more streamlined drafting that's easier to understand and providing definitions up top that can be referenced as one works their way through the ordinance. With respect to the actual management of city property, that should definitely be handled in a separate
Separate.
ordinance, or the existing ordinances should be amended by a separate resolution. Largely because probably dealing with distinct subject matter that shouldn't be addressed in the same ordinance. But that is definitely something that if council wants to readdress, would be a good topic of discussion for a committee meeting, because you need to decide, are we talking about just use of city facilities, or are we talking about who has the authority and what are the processes for assigning property rights? If we want to lease portions of a building, if we want to rent out or license for use. Council already exercises, that to a degree, and it's setting rental fees for community center rooms and things like that. So I think that is a wholly distinct topic of conversation from the actual security issues addressed in the key card ordinance.
Well, we'll come back to that. Go ahead, Vice President Russell.
Yes, I just wanted to say that maybe you want to get a chance to look at the legislation we created first, because Director Hannah and I and Chris, we went through a lot of scenarios when I drafted the legislation based on a lot of things he just said, because I had a separate piece of legislation for access to property. And then I also had brought up that we were the only facility that people were able to come in and didn't have a visitor's badge. And so that was another added piece that we talked about, where people didn't sign in or sign out. That, you go downtown to City Hall, you had to go through a metal detector. You had to, your purse had to go through the metal security, and you had to sign in or swipe your driver's license, put on a badge. But we have none of that, no access like that for our residents or anyone. So people can come in and out of City Hall. You never know if they're an employee or if they're a visitor, and visitors are not identified. So that was another piece that we were talking about into the security legislation, but also I had another piece of legislation for just building use as well. So it's been a little challenging trying to put all of those pieces together in one piece, so we try to separate it.
Councilman Posh?
Let me take a step backwards. Councilman Cobb, you mentioned that there was a news story today,
Yes,
and how is that relevant to this conversation? Because I have been oppressed and I did not listen to any news story. I was kind of sick of news stories. Sorry, guys. But
No offense.
well, back in our I think it was April 2nd meeting, when we were discussing access to city properties, the mayor volunteered that he had no access to the law
I
department
remember that.
or
Point
to
of
the
inquiry, Mr. President.
Yeah, go ahead.
or
For Mr. Cobb, do you have the exact quote in front of you of what I said in that meeting?
I don't have it in front of me,
Okay.
but it's on tape.
You may want to revisit that quote before you make an expression of fact about what I said.
Well, okay.
I actually recall.
I mean, whatever it was, it was said on a video. Go ahead, Councilman.
I lost my train of thought, but let's
Let's
go to someone else.
No,
What I
go
actually
ahead.
said, and so I'd like
Go
to
ahead.
help the councilman.
Go ahead.
I'll find it. Let's hear from someone else.
Okay, does somebody else want to speak? Well, one of the reasons No? Okay, one of the reasons we're doing this is if there is something somebody wants to do, we kind of have an agreement that we see if there's enough interest between us. So, Councilman Cobb, are you saying that you would like to revisit the ordinance that gives the mayor?
Yes, I would.
And so if that's what you want to do, I want to see if there's support for him doing that, because we don't usually go ahead with moving something forward like that without a consensus.
Excuse,
You know what I mean?
do we have any, and I don't have it with me, do we have anything in the legislation that refers to what Councilman Cobb is talking about? Or that would be something different as far as, you want, wait a minute, maybe I'm confused.
No, there's an existing ordinance,
Correct,
and that's what Councilman Cobb is talking about.
that he wants to look into.
Look into and maybe amend.
Okay,
And
okay.
That's what I see.
I'm going to pull it up in a second. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I would support that ordinance. I also would like to know if there's a way we can collect a list so we know which employees have access to which doors.
I believe that is actually included in because Councilmember Russell, that was something you mentioned.
Yes.
And so I think that did get included, basically so that there's a database of who has access to restricted areas.
Thank you.
Councilman Patrick,
President,
yeah.
for clarification, are we still on old business? Or-
Yes, but we were specifically addressing whether or not other council members were interested in having Councilman Cobb review and possibly amend an existing piece of an existing ordinance.
I mean, at least speaking for myself, I'd be open to hearing any suggestions that you might have.
Then I would say same here. Any objections? Okay. Councilman Cobb, did you want to add anything else?
No, I'm
Looking for it.
looking for,
For the quote. No. Well, we can,
You know, this is a council meeting, okay? And, you know, I recall a certain, my initial question was, there was a news story today, and I was just trying to, and apparently it's, to better understand what we're talking about, I need a little bit of understanding of what happened to that news story. Now, I know news stories sometimes are true, sometimes they're not fully baked, they're sensationalized, but generally there's some truth to the matter when you see it on the news. I'm trying to get a sense of really what was said and the impact. There was a statement I remember when we were talking about the sharing of key cards with the mayor and his spouse and how it was used, and I can't have access to the law department. I don't know the exact series of words that were used, but that was the general, that's what I assumed. There's a lot of sensitive stuff in that law department that I'm concerned about. And I'm very, very concerned about how the city is run. Is it safe for our employees? We know that there's case after case of retribution. We're hopefully going to be getting an update from our law department in our next meeting about the cases that have been presented to them, which, there's some liability issues. This whole issue regarding the issue with the text messages, and I didn't know any about it, any of this. Okay, it's I don't want to say it's being kept from council, but we don't know about it, and I assume that there's other issues out there with other employees. So I do think what Councilman Cobb mentioned about having an executive session so we could look through what the liabilities are that we have, I think is incredibly important.
do we have time for that at the next council
I
meeting?
believe so, yeah.
For an executive session? Okay.
I thought I saw it was
Cobb
gonna,
is ready.
I thought it was gonna start at 5:30, so we could do that.
Councilman Cobb, did you want to?
Those restrictions, for instance, my key card does not open those areas, for one. That would include the detective bureau, the police department on the lower level. That would include the courts, and the law department. So other than that, I believe that there's.
So that's what I'm referring to when you said your key card.
Councilmember Cobb, a point of order, excuse me, could you identify for the record what you're reviewing?
Yes, I'm reviewing the video from our council committee of the whole meeting, April 2nd, 2025. And that was approximately at 15:12 when that statement was made, and he referenced his key card. So I think as any person, at least I understood that to mean that you did not have access to it. Now, if you're gonna say, well, I didn't use my key card, I used someone else's key card, so I was being truthful at that time.
So a couple of things, Mr. President, if you
Yeah,
would
go ahead.
lend me the time. First of all, I can see that you're upset about this, and that is not something that I think is a good thing. So I hope that at some point you can find a way to be less upset about this. But aside from that, and that's just sort of on a personal level with you, Mr. Cobb. But aside from that, if you recall the reason why we were discussing the access that key card allows, do you remember why we were discussing the levels of access that key card allows?
I don't recall the specifics, I'll have to go back and look at the tape. But I believe that anyone that looked at that tape and puts the media in context,
Okay,
you conveyed
you're-
to us.
You're putting something in a particular context in your mind, and I appreciate that. And I'm trying to work with you on that. But I remember the context, and the context was that people were concerned that my wife had the potential of using that key card to access certain sensitive areas in this building. Because one of our residents, took a picture of my wife and saw that she was holding my key card at a particular period of time. And so the concern that was expressed was that my wife had the potential to access any of those areas that I listed using my key card, right? That was the context of the discussion that we were having. Do you remember that?
What I remember is what you just stated.
But, okay, so you can go back and look at the context of that discussion if you'd like. So I'd like to turn it over to Assistant Law Director Heltzel. Can you tell the council how you access the law department?
Yeah, I use a key fob
Okay, so why do you use a key fob and not your key card?
because the key fob works and the key card doesn't.
Do you know why that is?
I think it's because the key fob system is through the court.
The key fob system for police, for the courts, for the law department are all separate systems and separate from the city's general key card access, which is actually a security improvement that I implemented after becoming mayor because we didn't have any of that security going on with the exception of those specific delineated areas. The IDs being used to access sort of the more general departments that don't really have sensitive information accessible were generally open to the public. And I'll say, you'd like for me to try and
Yeah, wrap it up.
Okay, so I appreciate Councilman Cobb's concern, but it's misguided in this case. The conversation that we were having was about the concern that council members and perhaps the public had about a non-elected, non-employee having access to sensitive areas of this city hall, when in fact, the access that she had was a wholly separate system from any of the sensitive areas that you were concerned about. And I very clearly outlined that, and it was in response to a concern, a specifically illustrated concern about my wife having access to sensitive areas of this building. And I addressed your concerns specifically.
All right,
So
well, thank you, man. I took it as just, I don't even have access to every office, but that's the
Mr.
context.
Councilman
Did-
Posh, just
did
to
you-
be clear.
Go ahead.
Just to be clear and to answer your question, it was a news media came out today with a video of the mayor entering the law department office with a key fob or card and coming in at 7 a.m. in the morning when no one else was visible. That referred to this video or YouTube that stated that the mayor did not have access to that area. That's what Mr. Cobb is referring to. You were in Greece, and I'm just explaining and giving you the updates to what the conversation is about.
All right, go ahead, Council.
So
We gotta-
I gotta tell you, this is like it happened during the budget. It happened, I mean, it happened regarding the survey with Burgess. We are just being fed a whole bunch of untruths here. How can we possibly do our job when we are not being told the truth?
Point of order.
Well, here's the
Point of
thing.
order,
We
Mr.
need-
President.
we need to-
Please,
we-
I need the council member to recognize that what he's currently doing right now is accusing me of lying to the council
Okay, so.
when I in fact did
But
not do that.
here's what I really like to do. Let's, as much as we can, I realize we're gonna have reactions, but we do need to stick to the what's on the agenda.
Could I request that the legislation be updated to not just reference badges, but maybe key fobs and any other things, because it's clear based on this conversation
It
that
does.
It was, and it
Perfect,
even added keys,
Okay.
actual keys, because we understood that the badges was not the only thing that gave employees access, was the key fobs and actual keys that opened up all doors.
great, perfect.
Okay, I mean, that makes sense. So I think we know, certainly, Councilman Cobb, you can review that existing ordinance, and it looks like we're all set for Monday or, for the, do you call it the key card access?
No, it's not
What
called
is
the
it?
key, it's
I-
security, isn't it? It's-
Oh, I don't remember what we called it.
I think it's security, we've been going at it with that one.
Yeah. it's- All right, so legislations, resolution ideas, we're doing this obviously because if there's anything that we want to move forward, we need to decide that as a council. So anybody want to bring in some on item number 3 on the agenda? Go ahead,
Thank you, Mr. President.
Councilman.
There are two things that come to mind for me. So firstly, at least speaking for myself, it's become clear that we really need to strengthen our whistleblower protections. And so I would love for the law department to review what exists and maybe suggest some ways that we might be able to enhance that. It's deeply concerned by this piece that was published in Cleveland.com Friday evening. And then again today, we saw another concerning piece. So that's one thing.
Could I ask one question about
Yes.
that? Or okay, is there an existing whistleblower that you want to, you said strengthen, or is it something you want?
I think that it would be helpful if the law department were able to provide an overview to us of what currently exists. And then from there, potential recommendations on what we might be able to do
Okay.
differently. So that our employees are able to come to work and not have that hang over them. Also, as many folks have talked with us about, both in public comment and through emails and in person, there is a suggestion from a lot of people that we adopt a resolution. And I think that we are at a point where that is appropriate. And so I would recommend that we consider passing a loss of confidence resolution
And what is this loss of confidence about?
in the mayor and his ability to administer the city.
Confidence. Okay. Any comments from council? Go ahead.
I think we need to talk about this. It's a high bar. We have an elected mayor that was duly elected, that I, for one, has lost confidence in his abilities. I feel like many others, he should resign. but we don't have any power to kick him off, kick him out of the city. He's certainly gonna stay on. We've certainly seen that even when he was asked, even when, the plain dealer has gone out and said he should resign. So he's here to stay, but council speaks through resolution, and I think it's really important that this city understands those of us that do not feel comfortable with his abilities, his level of trust. I think it's important, since we speak through resolutions, we have to say something. And, I sort of look at, we have our job to do. I think we need to make it very, very clear to the community, we will continue doing our job, even though we've got a loss of confidence in this gentleman. I mean, if you sort of look at the track record of the amount of legislation that gets put in front of us from the mayor, that we pass. And we pass because it is the right thing to do. We will continue to do that while we're going through this period of just hopefully waiting for a new mayor to be elected in November.
Any other support for a loss of confidence resolution?
I
Councilman
see
Ward?
that as a way forward, more so than asking him to resign, because the voters need to make that determination. So we put our confidence in our citizens that they'll make the right decision coming into November. The loss of confidence at least gives us the opportunity to say, as you so eloquently stated, where a lot of us are at mentally right now in terms of faith that we have in the leader of the city. So I can definitely support that kind of legislation.
Others?
Yeah, I'd like to see the language of that resolution. I would join in it.
I don't know, were you volunteering for?
Before coming to this meeting, I drafted something short that I'm happy to share with folks. We could certainly go with that or modify that or write something entirely differently. But I feel like, at least speaking for myself, after seeing the article Friday evening, I felt that it was important for me personally to make that position known. And so coming here, I wanted to draft something that could then be shared and receive feedback.
There's been so many articles. What article are you referring to for Friday?
The article that alleged that the law department contacted the county prosecutor regarding potential felony charges against a Cleveland Heights police officer.
Mr.
In
President,
Councilman
Mr.
Collins,
President,
not coming.
In the executive session that we're gonna be having, I was told through somebody in the city that there was a grievance filed, and I would assume some of that information is confidential. Can we include that in the executive session? As an item in the executive session that we have with the law department next?
I defer to.
Assuming that a grievance had been filed, I'm not sure if one might have been, I'm not aware of it if it had. But in the sense that it is, there would be pending litigation. I believe it could be properly addressed in executive session. But just as a point of clarification for this council, you should know that at no point did the law department seek to file charges against Sergeant Mose for any reason. The seeking of an informal opinion from a county prosecutor is a common practice that occurs all over the state with local municipalities and county prosecutors. It is not evidence of an intent one way or the other. In fact, it can both serve as a basis for a municipality proceeding to file charges against an individual, as much as it can serve as a matter of protecting an individual if the issue is raised as to why the city did not pursue charges. So I think it has largely just been a matter of shorthand. I think that it has come across in articles. I don't think there was any willful intent on the part of people reporting the matter to suggest that the law department was actively seeking to file charges against Officer Mose, but I can assure you that that was not the case.
Yeah, I understand that. Go ahead, Councilman.
I'd like to have information from the law department on why the call was even made and who asked for the call to be made, and we can do that under executive. I'd like to do that under an executive session if it's indeed proper.
Yeah, as long as it's proper. I mean, I think that's the question is, why was that even attempted? Was it, was it trying to find out information or was it prompted, by an administration official or, anybody? So, okay, if we can put that on and you could let Addie know after speaking with the law director and whatever you have to do, that it is a proper use for executive session, we'll gladly do that. So on
Mr.
the,
President,
yes,
if I could, like I shared, I drafted something, and so I want to share copies with everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for the larger font.
Can I suggest we share this with you?
Of course, yeah.
Mr. President,
yes,
can we get the council clerk to post this?
yeah, I think that's a good idea. Did you purposely keep this kind of general?
I did,
I'm talking about I'm sorry, I should have said the whereas clauses.
yes, rather than citing specific incidents, I thought that from my perspective, it would be good if this had a general tone. And so that's the tone that I used when writing this.
Okay, I mean, that's the first thing that go ahead.
So, I mean, one of the problems I think we're gonna have, if it's a general tone, is, there's a couple go-to things that the mayor does when he's threatened with stuff like this. And, one of them, you play the race card. The other one is, hey, you're really criticizing the form of government, you're really not you're not criticizing me. I think we need to cite some examples such as, like the budget process, for example. I mean, I can't, okay, so you guys have more longevity here than I do, but that was the wake-up call for me. I mean, the misinformation we got through that whole process. I mean, we'd spend 20 minutes here, we'd be hearing about fund balances. We find out they were all wrong in the end. Not all of them, but significant ones were wrong, and it was redone. I mean, there's things like the unaudited financial statements. The question I asked in the finance committee about the IRS. I mean, there's just a lot of issues here that just have been I guess what I'm trying to say to get back focused on this particular issue, I mean, I think it would be helpful to cite some particular examples. Because it's gonna be turned into an issue of, this is all political, and it's not. But it's easy to blame us for it to be political and distract. So I think maybe we do need to have some of the facts, and I'd be more than happy for the ones that I know, compile them. Maybe everybody else can do the same, and when we meet again, we can make the determination if it makes sense to actually include them or not.
So if, I would just suggest this, if you're not comfortable with writing them, writing out whereas clauses that are more specific, we could always amend it at the, when you propose it. If there's somebody that wants to, maybe you might wanna do that and send them to Addie or, I don't know.
If folks would like for me to, I'm happy to take a stab at writing some additional clauses and adding them in if there is consensus that we'd like some more specifics in it.
Anybody against this? Okay, so, and the whistleblower, just so I understand what we're doing here, you're asking the law department to give you more information about that.
I think that it would be helpful if they were able to provide a summary of existing protections and perhaps provide some recommendations for how we might be able to strengthen whatever currently exists, because I am deeply concerned, firstly, as I've talked about repeatedly, that it appeared that Andrea Heim was retaliated against. And based on this article that was released Friday evening from Cleveland.com, it concerns me that something similar may have happened there. And so I think for the safety of our employees, we owe it to them to research whether there's something that we could do to further protect them.
Okay, so you're actually not gonna work on any legislation right now. You wanna get some information first.
It would be helpful if the law department could help us with that.
We could provide a brief of the city's of current existing federal, state, local protections. In terms of recommendations, I think what we could do is we could provide examples of protections that are perhaps offered by other municipalities that aren't part of the cities.
Yeah.
But the law department, can't make a policy recommendation in
Yeah.
terms of,
Well,
we can provide examples.
Yeah, at least speaking for myself, that would be very helpful. How do other folks feel?
I may can get some for you.
Okay.
Yeah, I would imagine you would have some experience there. More?
I have another item,
Okay, yeah, sure.
unrelated to this, but sort of related.
No, that's okay. We're on legislation and
It would be
resolutions.
it'd be another resolution of sorts and possibly an ordinance. So at the school district, we had a chief public information officer, and it happened to be the treasurer, so it didn't have to be like a fully staffed position, but it was someone that was very specific to process and manage public information requests. And there seems to be a lot of those that have been going through the city. And earlier, I had felt like I wasn't getting information when I've asked city administration. So I talked to the law department to try to get a sense of, well, what's the process? How does it work? And there really is, I mean, it goes to the law department and you have an email that it gets processed. But I'd like to see how other cities, process public information requests. I mean, how they're logged, how they're managed. And there's a process, and I would like to see likely an ordinance that gets in place that sort of solidifies the work that gets done to it. And I do believe that there is an award through the Secretary of State or the auditor, probably the auditor, that the district received about how it processed public information requests and how responsive it was in getting those processed.
And how you get the documentation as well.
Well, there is the whole issue of how long you maintain your records and maintain your videos and so forth. Record retention policy. And just in my conversations, it seemed like it really needed some work. And I would turn to some of the best practices that other cities do to see if we're sort of following those best practices.
And also getting the documents that you request in the proper format as well. Because if you recall, the emails that I received from public records requests was 7,000 pages with one email on each page.
Do you know what she's talking about? The formatting? Yeah, so she did a public records request for email addresses and that we use to send out to the public that the city administration uses. And it came out to be a 7,000 page document that could have obviously been shrunk down to,
It was formatted that way, it wasn't formatted in the original way, which was supposed to be done that way, but it came in 7,000 pages with one email on each page. So that needs to be addressed as well.
Go ahead.
If I could ask the assistant moderator another question. Am I understanding correctly that
You have
after
you print them for me.
city council passes a budget, that the administration is able to move money across accounts without receiving approval from city council?
So there is a provision in the annual appropriation measure that states that the mayor, without authorization from council, may make intra-fund transfers. So say for example, 201 general fund, I think. Anything within that single 3-number designated fund, the mayor has authority to move money anywhere in that fund. Provided, of course, any other statutory or constitutional limitations not impairing the validity of contract and all that. But so that it's not a codified, it is part of the annual appropriation measure that's just in there every year.
So,
Oh, that's-
would we be able to update that legislation to restrict that ability?
Well, I think he just said it's not legislation, it's
Well,
Well, he said it's not in the
it's an
ordinances.
appropriation legislation,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
it's not codified. It's not a codified or charter power. So, but yes, that ordinance can be amended as it's largely the same manner as the budget is amended.
I would propose that we consider amending that to restrict that ability.
Mr. President,
you know, any other, hold on one second, any other council comments on this? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's something the finance department should also weigh in on. Not the finance department, but the finance
Committee?
committee.
So can you explain that again, Councilman Petrus? I'm sorry. My apologies.
Currently, as the assistant law director described, money can be moved within funds across accounts
And you wanna
So
prohibit that?
once appropriated,
once
so
appropriated.
the mayor cannot appropriate unencumbered funds that are remaining in the unencumbered portion of of a balance. But any funds appropriated to a fund can be reapportioned throughout that fund without council approval.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, go ahead.
so. Couple different things. First is the ability to do something is one aspect of committing to a particular action. But another very important aspect that you should probably consider is whether or not you should do that thing, not whether or not you can. There are reasons that for a very long time, under the city manager form of government and now, operational necessity and efficiencies, the movement of money based on committee discussion, on a council schedule, part-time council members, is probably not the most appropriate way to designate the movement of all funds within the government after money's been appropriated. I know that Councilman Posh mentioned that the finance committee should weigh in on this. But his original sort of misspeak, you might want to heed that as well. And I think the council should probably heed that misspeak and invite the finance department and pretty much every other department to weigh in on that change as well. If you have an interest in the city operating effectively and efficiently. If you've got different goals, then maybe don't. But in the event that you have the goal of the city operating effectively and efficiently, you may want the people who actually use the money that you appropriate to weigh in on how those things are moved and the ability of the directors and the people who work in the departments and divisions to do their job, their ability to do their job would be impacted by this kind of less than measured approach. And I would also like to point out, and this is maybe just a bit of context as well, given the I know Councilman Posh is resolute that politics has nothing to do with any of this, but that is a more difficult pill to swallow for many of the rest of us. And so I would think maybe that Councilman Petrus, in considering this particular course of action, might want to think about if he is successful in his mayoral bid, how restrictive and how city manager-like, and actually this is well beyond a city manager level of restriction. He would prefer his ability to do his job to be impacted by.
Well, thank you, Mayor. You know, I do think that this really comes down to kind of the transparency issue that we had on the contracts. You know, it wasn't really that we wanted to be directly involved. And I don't, you know, I'm not speaking for you, Councilman, but if the issue is that money's getting moved around and we don't know about it, that could be something that could be addressed in the legislation without changing the authority. And I'm hearing this for the first time, so I'm just, you know, that's just one thought. That does everybody understand what I'm saying? Yeah, I mean, that's one approach. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think it's a trust issue, which is it is the same issue regarding the contracts, okay? You know, although I wasn't here when we voted for it, but I supported the legislation. It was all about trust. And I think looking at how the money is being moved around is an issue of trust. When it comes to the finance committee of council, regular attendees are the finance director. And I think we get their counsel on what the impact of this is. I mean, we don't want to put shackles on the administration for doing their job. It's got to be clean and efficient, but we meet every 2 weeks essentially. If something has to be moved, we've got a track record of approving it if it is appropriate. So.
Is this something we want to follow up with with the administration in a finance committee meeting, or how do we want to move forward?
Looking on the agenda for June 3rd right now, I can add that to it as a discussion point, but I would like to, Director Hairston will be there.
He will?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'd like to ask him how it works right now for him in terms of efficiency.
That seems like a reasonable approach. Any other comments about this particular issue? Any other legislative ideas that anybody wants to put forward? Nothing? Okay, the only thing I wanted to do, and that's just because and I don't want to get resolution happy here, but you know, I would really like to do a resolution in support of the staff. I think this has been just, you know, it's just a little nicey nice, but you know, I think it's been difficult. I've certainly heard that, you know, from the horse's mouths, so to speak, that it's been difficult. And with your permission, you know, I would like to just write up something that just says that we all support the staff. Just generally, you know.
I think we should add
give
the
them a
officer
pattern.
in there as well. And some, you know, some specific names, if we could. I mean, some people we don't know, but things that.
I'm
Well-
afraid if we put a name in there,
Yeah.
they're gonna end up getting fired.
Well, I'm more worried about just saying, if you say, you know, somebody's name, you're then kind of implicitly leaving out,
Other
you know,
people.
other people. So I just,
Okay.
you know, it's not that I want to gloss over.
No,
but
I understand.
I mean, we all support the
Yeah,
staff.
we
I
do.
just,
100%.
but did you want to?
I was gonna say, I really appreciate that idea. I mean, it's something that
Just seems timely.
it seems certainly timely. I wouldn't have thought about it. Maybe I should have. I wish I did, but I think it's brilliant. I think we should do it.
I don't know, brilliant.
Thank you for that.
Nice.
I think it is.
I'm
We do
glad-
nice things.
I'm glad you said that, because that was my thing too.
Any other legislative ideas? Any new business? Which is kind of like these legislative ideas are new business. No new business? Okay, in that case, this meeting is adjourned at 8:11.